Say there, stranger. Remember me? I'm that stranger who stalks your sanity. I'm here today, August 2nd, 2024, with a sort of public sanity alert. Truth be told, I've been wanting to do something along these lines for a while. However, I have quite a few projects on my plate which take priority, but I'm taking this opportunity to address the subject, the genre of what is called, I believe, adult fantasy fiction. I'll say AFF for short. Now, as you might infer, this is a genre of modern entertainment, largely coming out of Hollywood, that doesn't really appeal to me. And I can say that I have never watched a film or TV series in this genre. Nevertheless, over the past couple of years, my attention has been drawn to it, largely because I realized that the so-called culture wars involve various aspects, and one of those, a powerful factor in the culture wars, is the AFF material coming out of Hollywood. It is of no interest to me at all, yet I began to follow the phenomenon, I'd say over the last couple of years, now and then, and I observed that certain parties on the internet who are apparently fans of AFF were launching an attack against Hollywood, and this by now, some of you may know, is quite a famous event in the world of, say, the American public and possibly the entire world, because these films, these adult fantasy films coming out of Hollywood, are imported to the entire world, exported to the entire world. So, what's it all about, Rome? By the way, Rome is an insider term in my in-group for the ethnic and racial variations of the human species. So Rome, which is a Coptic word meaning humanity, refers to all of the variations of the human races except one. I can tell you at the outset that I perceived this aspect, this factor in the so-called culture wars as being really crucial to our future on this planet. Why? Well, because I teach about the faculty of imagination, and I teach people how to use their imagination in the optimal manner. And I consider AFF to be an extremely bad choice in the use of imagination. I often cite an alchemical formula from a 17th century document called The Art of Gold Making, in which it says, I paraphrase, "Let thy actions be guided by the true and not the fantastic imagination." So, I propose to you, do you know the difference between the true and the fantastic imagination? Now, in my view, AFF is a product of the fantastic imagination. And in that respect, it is deviant, perhaps even toxic, and most certainly directs the human mind away from the proper use of imagination. I'll start out by quoting someone that I have followed in tracking the the outrage and objection of fandom being those people who follow AFF films and franchises and characters and plots. The outrage of the fandom against Hollywood since a few years now, maybe 4 or 5 years, What this battle devolves upon is the fact that Marvel Disney, as it's called, because it's coming out of Marvel films and Disney films and so forth, have produced a number of movies which demonstrate the woke culture and the indoctrination of woke Marxism. So they have seized upon the pre-existing vehicle of AFF as an opportunity, an instrument to propagate woke Marxism. So you find that many of the films and franchises and TV series show race-swapped and gender-swapped characters. And the plots of those films are no longer true adventure series. They are no longer variations of the heroic cycle associated often with Joseph Campbell's model of the monomyth. They show variations, deviations, distortions, and degeneration of that primal theme of the hero's journey. So I will quote the individual who runs the site Nerdrotic, not site, but YouTube platform. And this is the platform that I have used most consistently to follow what is happening in the battle between fandom, which means the tens of millions, perhaps hundreds of millions of people who follow AFF, and the studios producing the material of AFF. Now, Phil, who's a guy I'd place in his mid to late 40s, is savvy and well-informed and articulate spokesman for AFF and the fandom. And Phil, I will quote as saying, "Pop culture is culture." That is an exact quote. I stand today, and I would be really pleased if this message ever got out to Phil, that I, as one individual, consider that statement to be completely wrong and misleading. Pop culture is not culture. Pop culture is juvenile culture. It's culture for children and juveniles. And so I maintain, and I'm putting this out at the outset, that the fandom of untold millions of people who follow AFF are retarded. They are juveniles. They suffer from what is called maturity stop. In my opinion, no serious, self-aware, mature, adult individual would ever follow these films, ever. You have to be really using your imagination in the wrong way to be interested in any of this material. So, of course, one might object, who in the F am I to dictate the right and wrong way, to use the faculty of human imagination? Well, if anyone can do it, I can. I have the authority and I have the background experience as a comparative mythologist. After all, what are myths? What are mythic narratives? Well, they are the great stories that inform and drive human behavior through the ages. And these myths have diverse and rich cultural variations. So you find them in every folk group, in every ethnicity, and you find them expressed in the great legends, epics, and myths of the various races. And so I have some authority in speaking about the products of human imagination in this manner. Not only that, but I have also produced a body of work that presents the parameters and techniques for training imagination to be used in its correct and optimal manner. Such is the ground on which I stand as a scholar and comparative mythologist. And on the basis of my experience and my teaching, I can say, as I say in the title of this talk, that AFF is the Deadpool of human imagination. Perhaps better said, it's the death zone. Whoever engages their imagination as an adult in this material is funneling it into a dead zone, into a black hole, and in effect disabling themselves from the correct use of the power of imagination. This is my premise. To double down on that premise, I will say this. All right, if adult fantasy fiction, which is a cultural genre of entertainment of immense magnitude, is not the proper use of imagination, what is? Well, there is an option. There is a method to use the imagination that can compete with AFF. And I have developed this extensively, you could say, in a way. It is a central factor in the body of my work. So I can offer to the world a method, a technique of using the power of imagination that is incalculably superior to AFF. What is the ultimate form of adult fantasy? It is the narrative of the Aeon Sophia drawn from the ancient mysteries and the Gnostics. It is the ultimate guiding story of the human species. And this narrative is interactive. You can prove it. There is evidence for your participation in this narrative. I have explained this so many times from so many different angles. And so the fallen goddess scenario, as I call it, is the centerpiece of this epic transcendental narrative, which is really the story to guide humanity. Now, I'm going to take a moment to just drop back for a second into the background. One always looks into the origins of things or tries to find how things originated. Now, when I was young, I never read comics of adult fantasy fiction heroines, superheroes, X-Men, things like that. I read classic comics. And I don't know if they still exist, but classic comics was a genre of comics, American cartoon books, that came out, I think, in the 50s. And classic comics were unique in the way that they drew upon genuine imaginative material. For instance, one of my favorite classic comics was Ivanhoe. So this is a legend coming out of the mythic background of the Celtic peoples, the Arthurian knight Ivanhoe. And a classic comic would take material from the sources, such as Celtic literature and later poetry, and they would simply represent the stories in a comic book genre. So I love the classic comics version of Ivanhoe. I did not follow the superhero comic sequence. Now, all of that, by the way, goes back to an individual called Stan Lee. And there is a red flag ethnic alert in that name, because Stan Lee belongs to that ethnicity that is not included in the Rome of all other races. and is in fact opposed to the Rome. So I can now identify in Stan Lee, who created Marvel Comics, an agent who from the outset served the purpose of deviating and degenerating human imagination. And this effort has continued to this day and is now culminating in quite a dramatic fashion. So once again, briefly, in my response to Phil of Nerdrotic, I would say no, pop culture is not culture. Classic culture is culture, period. All true culture has classical, preceding classical sources in literature, art, science, philosophy, music, whatever. Now, to conclude this talk, I will confess that I am extremely reticent to devote even a few seconds of my precious time to investigating AFF more than I need to. For instance, I'm sure that someone in fandom could cite 20, 30, perhaps 50 different names of franchise films and different names of characters in those films based on the original plots, based on spin-offs off the plots. There are dozens of titles of films and probably hundreds of characters in those films, of which I really know nothing, and I take no care in informing myself. But I have used Deadpool in this title. Now, as far as I know, Deadpool, which I take as a metaphor for a dead end, is in fact the name of some superhero character with superpowers. So it happens that Deadpool is the name of a character and Wolverine, and so the film Deadpool and Wolverine is debuting as I make this talk. And there are so many other names of these heroes and heroines deriving from the Marvel Comics genre of Stan Lee. So many. And there are so many untold millions of people who do not only watch these films and franchises and spin-offs and TV series as entertainment, but they participate deeply, empathically in the plots and characters, and they buy the merchandise. So you can see behind Phil of Nerdrotic dozens and dozens of miniature figures of characters in Star Wars and other epic, so-called modern epic film franchises. So here you see the situation of adults who are retarded and who cherish these characters and plots and who surround themselves with gimmicks and icons of these various characters such as Wolverine and Deadpool. By the way, Wolverine. Now, that's a character in some Marvel Disney series, but to me, it's a trope to something else. So when I see Wolverine, I don't see any of those movies because I don't watch them. I see the clue to something else. So who is the true Wolverine? Well, there you have to go to answer that question. You might go. You don't have to go anywhere. You can sit there on your ass and go nowhere. But you might look into the dicey subject of historical revision. And that's where you would find the real Wolverines. And they are those who are dedicated, they are warriors, dedicated to overthrowing everything that opposes the well-being, prosperity, and optimal experience on this planet of the Rome. Well, that's perhaps rather a digression. I prefer to not elaborate further and bring this little talk, this critique of AFF, to its shuddering conclusion. Pop culture, I repeat, is juvenile and retarded culture. True culture is based, as it has always been and always shall be, on precedents, on something that worked before correctly in human imagination. And so, I am grateful to this topic. I am grateful to the topic of the culture wars. It gives me the opportunity to bring to your attention that alchemical adage: be guided by the true and not the fantastic imagination. Now, if that saying attracts you, if it strikes you, if it works for you, then certainly it must inspire in you the wish to know what is the difference. That is something that I teach, something that I have always taught. There is a real difference. And knowing that difference, well, opens a path to the transcendental, which is not fantastic, but mysterious and fabulous. And on that path, you yourself prove the truth of the narrative. And there is only one narrative on the planet through which you can realize and achieve the optimal expression of your own life as a member of the human species. Only one narrative that can guide to the complete and optimal use of the power of imagination.